Welcome. In this video, we'll get behind the numbers in the calculation of the unemployment rate during a pandemic shutdown. We'll show how to calculate that unemployment rate. Then we'll present the pandemic unemployment rate by state and by demographic characteristic. Before we get started, all numbers will be in thousands. Calculations are based on the current population survey data files. These are the data that the Bureau of Labor Statistics uses to calculate the unemployment rate. The numbers presented here are a little bit different than the official rates, primarily because they are not seasonally adjusted. Let's start by looking at the calculation of the unemployment rate during a pandemic. The definition of the unemployment rate is the number of unemployed over the number of employed plus the unemployed. The employed plus the unemployed is the labor force, the people who have a job and the people who are looking for a job. Unemployed are the number of people who have actually looked for work during the last 4 weeks. Those that did not look for work during the last 4 weeks are classified as being not in the labor force. Let's look at the numbers for August 2020. The number of unemployed was 147.4 million persons. This represented a decline of 10.6 million employed people between February and August. That's a 6.7% decline. The number of unemployed was 13.6 million persons, and this is an increase of 7.3 million between February and August. That increase of 7.3 million unemployed was a 114.9% increase over the number of unemployed in February, 6.3 million unemployed. The labor force was 161 million people in August of 2020, and that was a 3.3 million decrease between February and August. The unemployment rate is the number of unemployed divided by the labor force. In August of 2020, the unemployment rate was 8.4%, which means that 1 out of 12 members of the labor force was unemployed. This represented an increase of 4.6 percentage points from the unemployment rate in February of 3.8%. Let's look at the unemployed in a little more detail. We can divide up that 147.4 million employed into those who were at work and those who had a job but were not at work. There were 139.7 million people who had a job and were at work. That was a 14.2 million worker decrease between February and August. The number of workers who had a job but were not at work was 7.7 million workers, and that was an increase of 3.6 million persons who had a job and were not at work between February and August. We can further divide up the people who were at work into those who were part-time and those who were full-time. The number of workers who were part-time was 32.2 million workers. The number who were full-time was 107.5 million workers. That number of full-time workers was a drop of 10.5 million workers between February and August. We're seeing a pattern. The number of people who had a job and were at work dropped by 14 million workers. The number of workers who were full-time dropped by 10.5 million workers. If we further divide up the part-time into those who were part-time for economic reasons and those who were part-time for other reasons, the number of persons who were part-time for economic reasons increased by 2.9 million workers. And if we divide up those into those who want full-time work and those who don't want full-time work, the number who want full-time work increased by 807,000 workers between February and August. The not in the labor force are those persons who either don't want a job or haven't looked actively for a job in the last 4 weeks. The not in the labor force increased by 4 million workers between February and August and was at 99 million persons in August. Of those people, the ones that state that they would want a job was 7.2 million people. That's an increase of 2.2 million people between February and August. That's a 43.8% increase between February and August. We're now ready to ask what's different during a pandemic shutdown. There are two types of unemployment that are being miscounted. In the previous flowchart, the two types of people are the persons with a job but not at work, the increase in the number of people in that category between February and August. And then the second group are the persons that are not in the labor force and want a job. Those are people who might ordinarily be looking for work, but during the pandemic, they may feel that it will be difficult to find a job. They'll wait till the shutdown ends. The increase in both of these types compared to the level in February is what we should be interested in. There will be a natural number of people in each of these categories. We'll use February as the baseline to calculate what the ordinary number of people is, and the increase between February and August is the unusual increase because of the pandemic. The yellow boxes are the categories that we're interested in, the people who are not in the labor force and want a job, and the employed who have a job but are not at work. And we're interested in the increase between February and August. When I recalculate the employed, I'm going to take the employed and subtract the people who are not at work. When I look at the unemployed, I'm going to add the not in the labor force who want a job and the number of employed who are not at work. I need to add the not at work to the unemployed and subtract it from the employed. When I do this calculation, I end up with the unemployed increasing to 19.4 million persons from the 13.6 that we started with, and the number of employed declines to 143.8 million from the 147.4 that we started with. Calculating the pandemic unemployment rate, the number of employed over the labor force, results in a calculation of 11.9%, an increase from the 8.4% in the official unemployment to 11.9%. Between April and August, the pandemic unemployment rate has been consistently higher than the official unemployment rate and was over 15% until August. In the official statistics, the Bureau of Labor Statistics uses the seasonally adjusted rate. It's not clear that that's the right measure during the pandemic. We aren't looking at usual times, so adjusting for usual seasonal variations may not be that instructive. It may be more instructive to look at the not seasonally adjusted rates. Next, let's look at the pandemic unemployment rate by state. In each of the next 5 slides, we're presenting the unemployment rate calculated using the official definition of unemployment in the first column and the pandemic unemployment rate for April through August in the next columns. The final column gives the pandemic unemployment rate for August. The states that are highlighted in red have a pandemic unemployment rate over 10%, and the states that have the August unemployment rate in red have had an increase in the pandemic unemployment rate between July and August. Of particular interest on the first slide are the high pandemic unemployment rates for California at 15.4% and the District of Columbia of 19.6%. Turning to the next set of states, we have many states where the unemployment rate is under 10%. However, Hawaii has a pandemic unemployment rate of 18.0% and has had an increasing pandemic unemployment rate between July and August. Next are several states that have pandemic unemployment rates over 10%, including Maryland, Massachusetts, and Michigan. And of particular note is Nevada, where the pandemic unemployment rate is over 20% and reached as high as 34% in April. The next group of states also has a large number with pandemic unemployment rate over 10%. Only New Jersey, New York, and Rhode Island have pandemic unemployment rates above 15%. And then in the last group are several states that have high pandemic unemployment rates. Wyoming is listed as having 20% for August. Now let's look at the pandemic unemployment rate by demographic characteristic. Let's start with race and ethnicity. The pandemic unemployment rate is over 10% for all racial and ethnic groups, including immigrants. Remember, the overall pandemic unemployment rate was 11.9%. For African Americans, the pandemic unemployment rate is extremely high, 17.4%, and it was over 25% in April. By education level, less educated workers have higher pandemic unemployment rates. The pandemic rate for our less than high school and high school is around 14%. For those with more than a college degree, the pandemic unemployment rate fell to 8.6% in August. Females have higher pandemic unemployment rates than males, and the difference is greater than in the official unemployment rate. The official unemployment rate misses those female workers that have jobs but are not at work and have become discouraged workers, counted not in the labor force, even though they would like to have a job but are not actively looking. By age, younger workers have higher pandemic unemployment rates, and that's really for workers who are aged 20 to 29. There are three main conclusions based on these tables. The first one is that the official unemployment rate undercounts the true pandemic unemployment rate, and the difference quite large. For August, the pandemic unemployment rate was 11.9%. The official rate is 8.4%, so it's a 3.5 percentage point difference. The second conclusion is that there are two states, Hawaii, Nevada, and the District of Columbia, that have extremely high pandemic unemployment rates, over 18%, and several other states that have high rates. And this is very, very concerning. The third thing is that the types of workers that are undercounted in the official unemployment rate and are counted in the pandemic unemployment rate tend to be African American and female. For both of those groups, the gap gets larger when the pandemic unemployment rate is calculated compared to the official unemployment rate.